Welcome, colleagues, to H7 Tech Corner. Justin, you're doing this just to stop me. Today I'm in the Midwest Command bunker, which apparently is engendering some weird behavior, but that's okay. And we are going to explore some Excel features that you might not be familiar with. In particular, we're going to do continue the work from last week. And last week, we were taking cells that contained a bunch of words and sort of extracting specific words, including URLs and addresses, and doing something with those. And this week, we're taking words and we're actually going to decompose those into letters and then do analysis against those letters. So today's task, we're going to fool around with a game called Wordle. And I want to emphasize Excel is not the right tool for this. It's suboptimal. And the approach I'm using is not perfect for it as well. But again, for demonstration purposes, I think this is good. And again, I don't want you to focus on the Wordle thing we're actually doing. It's more, hey, how can I take my customers or my products and start to think about the kind of analyses I could do against those. So just to get started, and again, I'm recording this for video, so I'll give a little detail. Wordle is a game that's online. The New York Times has it. And every day you try to guess a 5-letter word, and you get 6 attempts to do that. And when you enter your first word, you get some feedback. So in this case, I've actually entered 2, but in my first word, the 3 in the middle, L, O, and N, are gray, which means they are not contained in the word at all. That's my hint. The letter A is in yellow or orange, depending on your screen, which means it's in the word at least once, but it's not in this first position. And the letter E is in the word at least once, and it is in this position. So my first word is the word, my first guess was the word alone. My second word was the guess shirt. And so in shirt, I picked up another letter. And so it's just a fun daily game, but it got me thinking, how can I use Excel to come up with better starter words? Because you only get 6 guesses. You want to do this in as few as possible. And so you want your starter words to be good ones. They contain common letters and in the right position. So I started thinking, how could Excel help? And so we really want to find the most frequently used words in 5-letter words by position. That's really important. By position helps quite a bit. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try to find the 3 best starter words. I don't want to make sure those words don't have any letters in common, right? Because you want to paint as full a picture as you can. And obviously, if your first word, you got a bunch of letters, then you'd abandon the rest of your starter words. But this is just an exercise for fun. And so my first challenge was, how do I come up with all the 5-letter words in the English language? Well, Google is always our friend. And so I just went out and searched for 5-letter words in the English language. In a second, Excel, I'm pinwheeling, will hopefully pop. I'll scroll down just a second just to show you. And so again, like last week, we start with content on a website. And so there are actually, according to this website, which I've listed in resources, almost 32,000 words in this particular list. And there's a couple of things that we see up front where we don't want to use all of these. Like some of these are clearly acronyms. Some of these are proper words. Some of these contain punctuation. So we know these will need to do some work to exclude. But for a starting list, it looks good. And we can even see, oh, these are separated by spaces, and that's going to become important. So what we do is, what I did, because I'm a nerd, is I went through all of these I think there were 40 total lists to get 31,000 words. And I just copied each list to the clipboard. And I'm going to scroll up in my worksheet, because normally I wouldn't show you that part. And I just pasted each of those lists into a cell. And so you can see cell, A1 has the first, 800 or so words. Cell A2 is going to have the next 800 or so words, and so forth. So that's the basic. We're getting a bunch of data off the web. And we did this last week, right? Where we wanted to pull address data off the web, but there's lots of things you can pull, and then use Excel as the middleman to play with, if that's the tool you want to use. And again, it's always sort of suboptimal, but if Excel is what you got and it's a one-time thing, good. Okay, so now we've got 40 cells, each of which contain up to 800 words, which is kind of messy, and we need to pull those words out. And I'm not going to go into detail other than to say, what I did is we remember that the space is the thing that separates those words. So I created a table that's got 40 columns, one for each of those cells we just pulled, and then it's got about 800 rows. And what we do is we go in and we search for the space key, the space character. And the reason I'm doing that is this table then allows me to identify the position in each of those 40 cells. I get all the positions of where the spaces are, because that I can use as a tool to slice up the cells. And I'm not going to go into detail on how I did it, other than think about if you've got a chunk of data and you need to tease it apart, and something that would be easier, like just using the built-in tools doesn't work, you can do that without a ton of effort. And so this is a top table, and down at the bottom table, let me scroll down a bit. Again, now I just go up and I use the starting position, and I pull out each individual word. So now we have a table that's got 40 columns and up to 800 rows, but each cell now contains a single word, which is the thing we want to start playing with. And we'll go to the third sheet. And here, what we're doing is we're taking that table and we just want to condense it into a single column of words. And I put some help boxes up here to explain it. So if somebody's looking at this later, they can slow things down and understand the logic. But we're just walking through the table by column and row and extracting each word. And then here's the first part, we're doing some tests. So here we're testing, say, okay, let's make sure that all of those words have 5 letters, because there were some goofs. This is not client ready work, so I didn't do a lot of work to mess things to ensure that there are no errors. Like this one, the letter I extract is more than five characters. We don't care, it's not client work. We'll just eliminate that one. And the same sort of thing, we also only want lowercase letters. So here we just evaluate every single letter of the first 5 to ensure they're all lowercase letters. And for those that pass those little tests, we just pull the row number. And again, this is the same technique we used last week, because now these are easy for us to go get. So we've got row 11, row 23, and row 46, all contain good data. And now we can finally start to do, in any of these, and I know Matt and Justin, you spent a lot of time, cleaning the data is always the nastiest part, because if you don't do it right, it just gums up everything else. So now we can go over and start doing actual analysis. And so in this first table, we just pull all the words and we decompose every word into its constituent letters. Easy peasy, right? We just pull these letters, because what we want to do then, if we go over to table 2, we start to look at letter count by position. Now we're hitting pay dirt, because we can say, okay, the letter A in English 5-letter words of the list we've chosen, it shows up about 1,000 times is in the first position as the first letter in that word, and it shows up 2,800 times as the second letter. So we finally have something somewhat useful by just looking at letter count by position. Whereas, the lowly letter X, it appears as a first letter in only 37 times out of 16,000 words that passed our first test. So for strategy, you almost never want to have a starter word that starts with X, right? That's just not very useful at all. Now over in the next table, and again, this is the real analysis. This first, just count by position. This gives you 95% of what you need, but it's not super easy to use. So we create another table, same exact data, but here we do a couple of things. One, we just do a distribution. So for the first letter in the word, if you look at the frequency count for how often each letter appears, we can see the letter A is 6.2% of all words. It starts with the letter A, right? And so for each of these positions, it adds up to 100%. So this is sort of useful. And in addition, I put in some conditional formatting just to make it a little easier for your eye to view the things that are most common. So wow, letter A, it really shows up a lot as the second letter of English 5-letter words. And so, if I were showing this to a client, it makes it a lot easier to tell the story. And again, we're never going to do this. We're never going to do Wordle words. But when you think about your customers, who's most valuable, who's not, your products, your locations, this is the sort of display that allows you to glean some insights visually rather than just quantitatively. One quick note I'll make is I didn't have a good way to exclude plural words, that is 5-letter words that end in S that are plurals. And in Wordle, Wordle doesn't allow plurals. So I manually just put a 0 here to fix that. It's not a perfect alternative, but for those of you who actually care about Wordle results, this is an important thing to think about. So I would highly advise you, as you're doing data analyses, never stop with just the first result. Think, how can I look at frequency counts or distributions? Because this becomes intuitively much easier to use. I'll stop for just a second. Matt or Justin, any questions up to this point? I know I'm not explaining the Excel functions in much detail because it's not really an Excel class or tutorial, but there's been a lot zipping by. So anything up to this point in the presentation?
No, I don't have any questions. I failed at guessing my Wordle this morning, but I'm curious to see if you end up close by my starter word. So
Yeah.
I am paying attention and I am following this. So it's very good.
I pulled it out. I think I pulled it out in 4 or 5 today, and only because of the last letter. And I should preface all of this. My only goal in life is not to be humiliated by my wife every morning, because we both play this, and she's way better at it than me. To the fact I've declared anytime we tie, that should be a win. I get high odds because I'm missing a chromosome. So I think it's only fair that I get some help.
Yeah, I'm a numbers guy, so anytime I can get letters and words correct, that's good. So I'm more of a Sudoku guy, but but Wordle's been growing on me.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a cute little diversion. Okay, so we just finished table 3, which again is a frequency count. You should always try to do these when you have a bunch of data, and it's a little bit complex because when you do that and then put some conditional formatting on it, it really makes it easy to find the high points and the low points. So this is a case where I actually like conditional formatting. And as is always the case with data, there's always some messiness, as I discovered the first time I went through it, and most of my starter words ended in S. And I think like 25% of words end in S. It was a really high number. So I had to do some work after the fact. And it's true of any time you're playing with data. So now let's go on to table 4. And here we're taking the same data from before, and we're just looking at the position of each. And then again, using conditional formatting to see what rises to the top and what rises to the bottom. So for example, let me pull this text box explanation out of the way. And as an aside, this is a great way when you're sharing a spreadsheet with others and you don't know in advance if you're going to be there to talk them through it. It doesn't cost you much time to do a little text box and provide an explanation. And I would encourage you, for your clients, if you're doing things in Excel, it's a good way so that they understand it. Or for me, I'm good at Excel, but I'm bad at memory. It's a good way for me to remember why I did that. So here we can actually see the letter S is it's the number 1 most common first position word. And so we want to tie our wife, so we really remember that's a good word to start with. Whereas interestingly, letter A is most common for both position 2 and position 3, as well as pretty close for position 4 and position 5. So we probably want our starter word to start with the letter S and the letter A, and then start goofing around in these. But it'll get harder to use that, as we'll see in a second. So the last table I'll do before we get into something that's really fun is just displaying. Here, we're taking the same data and we're just using the rank. And so for every single position, what's the first most common, the second most common, the third most common letter? Because what we want to do is then start assembling these into words. And I'll confess, like the first time I went through this was sort of my strategy, because it's not hard to say, okay, S-A, I want something with an R, and then it starts to get a little harder, right? Especially once you've created your first or second word, it gets kind of tough. So at the very end of this, and again, my goal is always to tie my wife, I built a little tool. And what this does is using it's actually the frequency counts from before. These are the complete list of the most common words in the English language where we're not using S as the 5th word. So S-A-M-E-Y, given all the caveats and rules I gave you, rises to the top of the list. And so I thought, okay, that's useful, but it would be hard if I only had this list. How can I have this list and then come up with a second word that contains no letters in common, and then a third word that also contains no letters in common? So we can build a little tool. And so I'll just type in that first word from the first list. And so now I have the letters S-A-M-E-Y taken up, and I want to choose a second starter word that contains none of those letters and also contains no two letters in common, right? Because you don't want to waste your positions. And so now this list here excludes all the words that contain any of these letters, S-A-M-E or Y. So now we've got a good second list of potential second words. And I will tell you, I've tried this, borid, it turns out, is good in our list, but it's not in the list of actual acceptable words in Wordle. And you can cheat, right? You can actually pull the actual list of Wordle words, but what's the point? Like if I know the words, that doesn't make it any fun. And so here we go. And I'm just going to choose pouring, and I'll give you the truth. These are actually the starter words I've been using for a few weeks now. And now I want a third starter word. So Excel chugs along for a little bit, and over in this list, and it starts to get interesting. There are not that many remaining words that don't contain S-A-M-E-Y and P-O-R-I-N, and also don't contain any repeated words or special characters uppercases. So I will tell you, I actually use my starter words are samey, pourin, and I actually use Dutch because for some odd reason I can never remember Butch. So those are my three starter words in Wordle, and I did some scoring on these as well. I just added up the distribution because I was sort of thinking, okay, you know, for each of the words, what kind of a score would I give it? At some point, if I really wanted to, you guys, we'd get the same list of words and see how well our starter words actually scored against it. But it's a little more effort than I think it's worth. So, you know, in full reality, these are the three words I use every single day. I still can't beat my wife on more often than not, but at least I have a reasonable chance now. I think we can all feel proud of that. Me not being human.
No, this was good. This was good. I enjoyed that.